The studio here at TTT on the Now Morning Show. Lisa Carey Rokas with you. And as we continue examining the issue of race, ethnicity, we're looking now to draw into the conversation a topic that surrounds branding, social media responsibility, and reputation management in the public domain particularly. And joining me via Zoom is Kevin FARRICK, who is the Senior Strategist, Brand and Digital at MCCAAN Advertising Agency in Port of Spain, and TENILLE CLARKE, Managing Director and Principal Publicist at Publicist Chambers Media Solutions, Managing Director and Principal at Publicist Chambers Media Solutions. Good morning to both of you.
Good morning.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. Guys, we are seeing a number of companies, agencies, institutions, schools, and so on being impacted, one more than the other. And, you know, we've seen where the Supermarkets Association has called on its members to have Ramsaran products withdrawn from the shelves. And we actually have a number of supermarkets who have actually done that. There's a call for a petition for the products to be removed from the school feeding program. Can this brand recover from what I would call a public relations disaster at this time, or crisis? I want to start with you, TENILLE, and then Kevin, you can weigh in.
Well, I think in order for us to identify where we are at on the spectrum of crisis and what is essentially reputation management at this point, we have to essentially define the responsibility of social media. Now, I hear a lot of people, and Kevin and I were having this conversation last evening, we heard a lot of people saying, you know, what can social media do? Social media in itself can't do anything. By definition, in accordance with the Chief Operations Officer at Facebook, who is Sheryl Sandberg, she essentially stated that social media only enables you to share what you want to share, when you want to share it, without asking permission from anyone. So ultimately, the responsibility lies on the general public to do certain things. In terms of the recovery process, I would say that three things need to happen. Things that need to happen would include accountability, accessibility, and action. Accountability from the organization in ensuring that they accept the responsibility for what has transpired, accessibility in terms of persons and the organization understanding that there needs to be a ventilation of that dialogue in the public domain. They have to allow persons to express how they were adversely affected by this digital experience, and action. There needs to be actionable items that hold to account. So it becomes very cyclic in nature, because once the actionable items start to come into play, then it circles back into the accountability process.
Yeah, but Kevin and TENILLE, the company that we're talking about did release a statement, did say that they have separated themselves from the individual. And, you know, so they have taken action and they've held the person accountable. Is this enough, Kevin?
Well, what you find happening, and we're seeing it as it's occurring in the US, for example. You know, that's a great model of what's been happening as we've been shifting this landscape in terms of racial ethnicity discussions. We've been seeing, yes, as TENILLE has said, the apology and accountability is important. The action is important. I think the very large next step is inclusion of a diverse range of persons at a decision-making level in companies. So that is now becoming the real yardstick by which we measure whether these companies are really serious about what they're speaking about. And are you putting your money where your mouth is? Are you including the people of diverse backgrounds who have vetted? Are you including them at levels where decisions can be made, and those decisions can impact and make sure that they impact different groups of people in the right way? That's a big factor.
Yes, because I was saying earlier on the program that a number of these decisions that we are seeing where persons take a decision to post comes from their circle or their sphere of influence. And if it comprises the same group of people, then that is what will permeate through. So in terms of inclusion, it goes beyond just mere for the sake of publicity, but certainly with the sake of ventilating issues in the boardroom, for example. And we saw where, and this is not just this company, we saw recently with Emancipation, there was a situation there, again, with one of the fast food outlets, right? And how was that how was that, how are these things approved? How are these decisions ventilated and approved, yeah?
Yeah, and the nature of social media is quick. Social media is a channel. It's a channel of communication like any other. Of course, it's different in that it's very interactive, it's very dynamic, it's rapid. And of course, the key thing is that your customers can now talk and respond back to you. They can like, they can unlike, they can share. Things can go viral in a way that they could not have in traditional media. So when approval processes are happening, there are usually more than one person or a number of persons in different departments that have to approve things that go out on social media. It still needs to happen very quickly. And understandably, sometimes things can fall through the cracks, which is why someone like TENILLE now can speak to the steps for reputation management that needs to happen afterwards. And maybe these are measures that need to be put in place, with companies as they think forward.
And I actually want to springboard off of something Kevin said there about the importance of having the diversity in the spaces and the places that matter in the boardrooms where the decisions are being made. And it was very interesting to note with the statement that was put out by the supermarket in question, even in reading the statement, one would note, or the persons with a public relations discerning eye would note that the words damaging actually came before offensive. Which can be very, very telling to an audience. You know what I mean? They're looking to have their sentiments acknowledged. They're not looking to. This is not a time or a place for the organization in question to be centering themselves in the dialogue as the offended party.
Okay, so just to clarify, you said supermarket, but you mean the production company, the company in question.
My apologies, the production company.
Yeah.
Yes, the word damaging appeared in the statement before the word offensive.
Yes, in the first paragraph, as I'm looking at here. Yeah. So you are saying that the organization needs to take a look at, need to put themselves last and respond to the public's, the damages to the public, so to speak, as opposed to themselves, yeah?
There needs to be a centering and there needs to be an understanding of who the is here in reputation management. It's not a self-serving experience. The bottom line is that there is a section of your customer base that feels wronged. This company has been in operations, from what I understand, for 70 years. So that brings about a lot of different questions as well. What is the actual corporate culture within these organizations that are perpetuating this kind of language that might be acceptable internally, but certainly being held to a different standard externally?
And so Kevin was saying that you can give a guideline as to the steps for reputation management. You want to share some of that with us?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, the three most important things, and I want people to have this as a key takeaway if there's anything from this dialogue that we're having, which is great to ventilate this online. It needs to be holding somebody accountable, it needs to be granting accessibility, and it needs to be actionable items. If there was a fourth thing that I would mention, I would certainly mention that at the nucleus of this all, there needs to be some measure of authenticity as well. A brand would not have to worry about crisis and reputation management if their brand from the inside out is built honestly and with some measure of authority and in understanding their story and place and space in a consumer landscape as well. And I'm sure Kevin can expound on that a lot more.
Well, before Kevin jumps in, that's why I opened by asking if you thought the brand could survive, because, we speak about brand equity, and depending on the level of brand equity that a brand holds, sometimes, a brand can survive certain crises, and if that's a word, crises. That was a crisis right there. Because the fact that there's a psychological attachment to the brand. And we are seeing where people are saying, I know this brand since I'm a child,
I certainly think that there is room for repair. This situation becomes a bit more layered, considering the nature and the relationship of the person in question that made the racist utterances online. But there is certainly room for repair here. I mean, the organization, as I mentioned, has a 70-year history of consumerism. So there must have been some brand trust in that organization for them to survive that extended period of time. But they need to make sure that, that there is an accountability there, people are held to account, and not in an epidermal way, Lisa. It needs to be beyond skin deep. It needs to be beyond surface treatment, as many organizations have often misstepped. We've seen a lot of it, particularly during the COVID period. There have been a lot of crisis communication situations that, that we can bring up on analysis, particularly in the context of the Black Lives Matter movement, etc. So then, if anything, that should have taught us that surface level treatment is simply no longer an acceptable means of remediation at this point.
I wanna just jump in here for a second, guys, because we're talking about it and we're speaking very specifically about this one situation. But for me, it was triggered by, let's say, the election situation, the election campaigning and all that part had a big role to play in what triggered this whole turn of events that's happening here. But we keep asking for accountability from the corporate side of things and from the corporate world and from the people who produce these products and all that stuff, and it's all well and good. But how much accountability do we expect from our leaders, from the people who were campaigning during the elections? Do we hold them to the same social standards and the same social responsibility as we are holding these companies, or we would like to hold these companies to?
Sorry, Kevin, go ahead.
Sure. What I think is important? When we think about companies, we talk about the bottom line. What's the bottom line? And that's very important to companies. But there's actually a strategic idea of thinking about your bottom line. It's called the triple bottom line framework. And it deals with profit, which is important. It deals with people, and it deals with place, the environment. And all these things must balance together in order for a company to really grow sustainably. And I think if a company does that in a really authentic way, it is felt, it's impactful. And I think the same thing for our leaders and political parties. They have to think of themselves in the same way. They need to think of a triple bottom line sort of environment where they place emphasis on different things that must balance, and they must do so authentically, because that's the only way it really resonates deeply with persons,
And just the springboard of from what Kevin is also saying, we are all protected by what is enshrined in the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. So whether you're speaking about private sector analysis, whether you're speaking about public office responsibility, there needs to be a constitution of honest dialogue. And yes, leaders do have a responsibility to speak clearly, to speak with affirmation against these kinds of rhetoric that tend to permeate the public domain in the days of election, particularly in the Trinidad and Tobago context as well. So my answer.
So speaking of the Trinidad and Tobago context, TENILLE, you said earlier that you outlined the steps in which the corporation may have to take to start repairing the situation and this public relations crisis. But when it comes to our culture, there are those who have, let's say, the Trinidad and Tobago memory when it comes to certain things is short. They may rage about something for maybe a month or so and then afterward go back to regular habits. Although we have seen that younger people in these days have actually gone a step further and have boycott things, some of which they have boycott permanently. Do you think this would come into play with a company that has a long history, 70 years, in this case, or do you believe that it is something that can blow over time?
I think that's a very loaded question. The key things that I noticed that you mentioned there was the youth, and that tells me that that we are no longer susceptible to the idea that the 10-day syndrome can be used as a benchmark or a measuring stick for holding people to account. I sincerely do believe that the wheels are turning slowly, but we are surely moving away from the idea of letting things blow over, which of course is the importance and of being able to pivot in a crisis communications and a reputation management situation. But the other thing too, Rishi, is that
Whoa, that's Carrie Love.
Sorry, we also need to understand that this is the nature of disruptive context that happens. You know, we speak about digital disruption and things of that nature. This is very symptomatic of that very disruptive nature. And from a brand management perspective, which obviously is Kevin's realm as well, we need to very much take stock of that too. We're no longer in a position where we can wait 10 days for things to blow over until the next big thing happens.
Yeah.
We help to account now, because then that becomes the very nature and the very essence of your brand. This process or this circumstance or this crisis will now be etched as a part of your brand identity. So how do you navigate that by just using a 10-day complex?
Right.
You can't.
You know, we could continue this conversation for the rest of the morning, but unfortunately, we do not have that type of time. So I do want to thank you both for joining us this morning, and you know, hopefully we could have that conversation. We could continue that conversation at another time. But for now, we're going to take a short break and come back with much more.